All right, let's dive right into this explainer. Today, we're going to look at how a single solitary battle back in 1942 completely broke what everyone thought was an unstoppable war machine and honestly changed human history forever. So, picture this. The year is 1942, and Adolf Hitler's forces have already conquered most of Europe. I mean, they've swept through France, Poland, and they've pushed incredibly deep into Soviet territory. Up to this point, the German blitzkrieg has just been moving like a hot knife through butter. But this massive mechanized momentum is about to hit a total brick wall. And that wall? It's a city called Stalingrad.
But before we get into the brilliant and, frankly, brutal strategies that defined this battle, we really need to grasp the sheer scale of the devastation here. 2 million. Let that number just sink in for a second. That is the number of human beings, we're talking soldiers and civilians combined, who lost their lives in this single battle. It's widely considered by historians to be the closest thing to hell that human beings have ever created on this earth. And you know, what makes that staggering number even more difficult to wrap your head around is the time frame. This completely unimaginable death toll of 2 million people wasn't spread out over years. It was compressed into just 6 brutal, unrelenting months of continuous fighting. There was no pause, no taking a breather, just half a year of absolute nonstop carnage. And to make it even more intense, all of this horror, all of that massive loss of life was concentrated entirely within the borders of one single doomed location. It wasn't some sprawling front line stretching across a whole country. It was this microscopic, hyper-concentrated theater of war. So to understand exactly why such an apocalyptic event happened in this one specific place, we have to look at the actual motivations behind the attack. That brings us to Section 1, Target, the city of Stalin, and the hubris of 1942. So here's the crazy part. Hitler actually didn't target this city for its critical military value. Not at all. He wanted it purely 100% to humiliate his greatest enemy by capturing the city of Stalin. It was a vanity project. And to achieve this, he deployed his absolute best. He sent the German 6th Army, which consisted of over 300,000 elite soldiers. Now, their entire tactical doctrine was built on open field maneuverability, mechanized speed, and just overwhelming air support. They marched in these perfect formations, fully expecting that a quick surrender was, just a few days away. But as we're going to see, they were devastatingly wrong. Let's look at Section 2, Rattenkrieg, the tactical shift, or the War of Rats. So the German expectation of this fast, sweeping victory met a terrifying new reality on the ground, and it fundamentally shifted how this entire war was fought. This brilliantly brutal tactical shift came directly from Soviet commander Vasily Zhukov. His order was surprisingly simple, but absolutely chilling. He told his troops, hug them. Get so close to the Germans that their air force cannot bomb you without killing their own men. See, the Germans had total air superiority. Out in an open field, they would have completely annihilated the Soviets. Zhukov realized, and this is crucial, that the only way to neutralize that massive technological advantage was to force constant, point-blank, hand-to-hand combat. And we really see a stark clash of military doctrines right here. On one hand, the German approach relied heavily on these sweeping maneuvers and immense air support to just bomb cities into quick submission. But the Soviets adapted. By dragging the enemy into this grinding, claustrophobic human proximity, they literally turned the very rubble created by German bombs into impenetrable fortresses. Think about it, a high-tech tank is completely useless when it's stuck in a collapsed living room, right? They fought street by street, building by building, floor by floor, and literally room by room. The Soviets essentially stripped away the exact technological advantages the Germans were relying on. This unimaginable, horrific environment actually led to a brand new term. The Germans called it Rattenkrieg, the War of Rats, because honestly, that is exactly what it felt like. The whole city became this dark, close-quarters maze of death. You had snipers laying perfectly still in collapsed buildings for days at a time just waiting. A single ordinary staircase might be violently fought over for an entire week. At one point, get this, a single factory changed hands 15 different times in one single day. It was an absolute psychological nightmare of crawling through the darkness, never actually knowing if the next shadow you saw held a friend or a bullet. Moving on to Section 3, Operation Uranus, the trap and the strategic reversal. Now, what's truly fascinating here is how the Soviets transitioned from surviving those intense micro-level battles in the streets to suddenly executing this massive macro strategy. Because while the Germans were entirely bogged down, bleeding for individual rooms and stairwells, the Soviets had backed up and were looking at the entire map. But before they even sprang their trap, nature intervened. As the brutal Russian winter hit, temperatures absolutely plummeted to a bone-chilling minus 40 degrees. Now, the Germans had been promised a quick summer victory, so they had no winter uniforms, no winter supplies. And at minus 40 degrees, guns jam up, tank engines freeze solid, men sit down to rest, fall asleep, and simply never wake up.
yet locked in the state of sheer, stubborn denial. Hitler strictly forbade any of his troops from retreating.
So, while the Germans literally froze in place, Soviet General Zhukov executed a breathtakingly fast, top-secret plan. On November 19, 1942, over 1 million Soviet soldiers suddenly emerged from the blizzards, attacking simultaneously from the north and the south. And in just 4 days, they completely surrounded the entire German 6th Army. Just like that, 300,000 men were trapped, cut off from food, from ammunition, and really, from hope. And despite Hitler ordering them to stay and fight down to the very last bullet, reality finally broke through the propaganda. On February 2nd, 1943, Field Marshal Paulus did the unthinkable, and he surrendered.
Which brings us to our final part, Section 4, the ultimate turning point and the cost of pride.
We really have to look at the aftermath here to understand exactly why this specific battle completely broke the German war effort. Out of the 91,000 freezing, starving German soldiers who actually survived the battle and walked into Soviet captivity, a mere 6,000 ever saw their homes again. To put that into perspective, an overwhelming 85,000 men died as prisoners of war. They were ordered to die as glorious heroes for an expanding empire, but instead they died as forgotten men in the ruins of a city that was never even theirs to take in the first place.
So, what should you really take away from this explainer? Well, this monumental turning point wasn't achieved because someone invented a magical new weapon. It happened because of a massive, brilliant strategic shift, moving from a gritty micro-war of attrition in the city's rubble out to a massive macro-encirclement of an entire army. Through completely unimaginable conditions and nearly 2 million casualties, ordinary people simply refused to give up, and in doing so, they permanently, irreparably shattered that whole aura of German invincibility. As we wrap up this explainer today, I want to leave you with a question to really reflect on. What is the true cost of a dictator's pride? We've just seen how absolute hubris led a supposedly unstoppable army right into a strategic trap, and how sheer, unbreakable human grit completely unraveled an empire. It's an incredibly dark chapter, for sure, but it's an absolutely vital one for understanding our history. So think about that and keep seeking out the fascinating stories that shape our world.